Good Friday afternoon. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Chris Harapsky. Breaking news today from the Justice Department. This just in. In the last few hours, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche announced that they have now opened a federal civil rights probe into the death of Alex Preddy. Blanche said the department is, quote, looking at everything that would shed light on that day, end quote. Preddy was shot and killed by Border Patrol officers last weekend. Right now, it is not clear if Minnesota officials will be involved in that investigation. Several leaders here, including Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis, have expressed frustration that state officials were being blocked from the investigations into the deaths of Preddy and Renee Good. New today, local journalist Georgia Fort's team speaking out after she and former CNN anchor Don Lemon were arrested by federal agents in connection to covering a church protest in St. Paul. The Center for Broadcast Journalism saying it stands with Fort and Lemon, saying, quote, in America, we do not arrest journalists for doing their jobs. Today we heard from Fort's family about her arrest.
My 7- and 8-year-old sister woke up today without a mom. My father woke up today without his wife. I'm demanding that my mom gets released. The separation of families will never be right.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says that the arrests come after a, quote, attack on a St. Paul church, end quote. The protest was because its pastor allegedly works for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. 3 people, including civil rights attorney Nekima Levy Armstrong, protested that same church that Lemon covered. They were also arrested, and we just heard from Levy Armstrong last night.
They used 3 different sets of restraints on us as if we were hardened criminals and murderers. We had ankles, shackles on our ankles. We had belly chains around our waists, and we had handcuffs with bars in the middle.
The protesters say that they believe the arrests were politically motivated because they offered to turn themselves in before they were arrested. Federal government claims they prevented people from practicing their religion in a place of worship. New today, President Trump backing away from a planned drawdown of federal agents in Minnesota. This comes as a nationwide movement is underway to protest immigration enforcement. People across the country pledging not to shop, work, or go to school. On Thursday, Border Czar Tom Homan admitted Operation Metro Surge had strayed from its initial focus. He said going forward, the goal is to arrest undocumented people with an additional criminal record. Homan gave no timeline for when agents would fully withdraw. However, he said knowing their numbers relies on cooperation from local jails. But overnight, President Trump says there will not be a drawdown of federal agents in Minnesota.
If we get these agreements in place, that means less agents on the street. This is common sense cooperation that allows us to draw down on the number of people we have here. Yes, I said it, draw down the number of people here.
Will you be pulling back immigration enforcement agents out of Minnesota?
We want to keep our country safe. We'll do whatever we can to keep our country safe.
So now pulling back?
No, not at all.
Okay, so that's another controversy, another contradiction within the Trump White House. Homan promised ICE agents will be held accountable if they don't hold up standards of conduct. While we wait to see if that cooperation plays out, we want to highlight a historic lack of cooperation in federal courts, not from local officials, but from ICE itself. Federal Judge Patrick Schiltz saying that the federal government has violated nearly 100 court orders, all involving the basic right to due process. Kent Erdahl takes a closer look.
The South St. Paul community has spent the past 2 weeks rallying around a former Packers student named Oscar, who came to the U.S. from Guatemala in 2021 to seek asylum. And despite following that legal process, graduating high school with straight A's, and even gaining approval to work, court documents allege that he was picked up by ICE at work on January 10th and taken to the Whipple Federal Building. The next day, Oscar's lawyer filed an emergency habeas corpus petition, but before that petition was heard, Oscar was flown out of the state to an ICE facility in El Paso. 4 days later, on January 15th, a judge granted that petition and ordered his release. But that did not happen. And after another 4 days, ICE told the court Oscar was scheduled to return to Minneapolis from El Paso on January 20th. But once again, that did not happen. It turns out he was taken to a different ICE facility in Albuquerque instead. And yet, after another court order and another delay, that online fundraiser finally confirmed that Oscar made it home yesterday, 19 days after he was detained.
Kent Erdahl reporting there. Again, Oscar's case is just one of 74 cases where ICE allegedly violated court orders that tried to ensure basic due process. In response, Judge Schiltz wrote, quote, "This list should give pause to anyone, no matter his or her political beliefs, who cares about the rule of law." By the way, Judge Schiltz, a Scalia constitutionalist who was put into his position by George W. Bush. Schiltz later added, quote, "The extent of ICE's noncompliance is almost certainly substantially understated," end quote. Just a few of the attorneys that we've spoken to say they filed more than 1,000 habeas corpus petitions. They say nearly all have been granted by judges, but in many cases, people have already been flown out of state. We're also following some major shakeups in the sports world, especially the Minnesota Vikings. Breaking just this afternoon. The Vikings organization fired general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah after 4 seasons with the team. The news comes after the Vikings missed the playoffs this season. In a statement, the team says that they are grateful for Kwesi's commitments to the team. Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Rob Brzezinski, will lead the team through the 2026 NFL Draft. Over in the Twins camp, the team announced today that it's parting ways with President Derek Falvey. This ends a 9-year run for Falvey, who most recently oversaw both baseball and business operations. In a statement, the Twins saying the timing of the separation serves, quote, "the best interests of all involved," end quote. Another huge story today. Luigi Mangione will not face the death penalty for allegedly killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in December of 2024. A federal district judge made that decision this morning. Judge Margaret Garnett also ruled Friday to allow into Mangione's trial evidence recovered from his backpack at the time of his arrest. Law enforcement seized several items from Mangione's backpack, including a handgun, a loaded magazine, a red notebook, key pieces of evidence that authorities have said tie him to the killing. Mangione's attorneys argued that evidence should be barred from trial, saying the search of their client's backpack was illegal because they had not obtained a warrant and there was no immediate threat to justify a warrantless search. If fraud is where all of this chaos we have now begins, let's get back to what is going on with fraud, specifically the response to fraud. A crackdown on fraud is impacting legitimate care providers and the people who rely on them. This week, the Senate's Human Services Committee heard testimony about this, and our Gordon Severson has more.
In the fight against fraud, there are Minnesotans caught in the middle.
Today we're going to focus on impact.
The care providers and people they serve who say they've been hurt by the ongoing crackdown.
These people did nothing wrong.
Susan Rosette is a care provider in northern Minnesota, and she says new procedures, including delayed payments through the Minnesota Department of Human Services, caused her employees to miss a paycheck.
It breaks my heart for all of us.
More than a dozen of them quit because they couldn't afford to stay.
We've had to triage the people we serve. The workers willing to stay and care for them are the only reason we're still operating. They're working without pay.
And with fewer workers, many providers are now scaling back their services.
If you can't have somebody get you out of bed and get you out to the bathroom, you can't stay in your home.
Clients like Zach Johnson and Matthew Gustafson say they're worried they might lose their home.
So please just don't take away my place that I live at.
Legal advocate Jonah Giese says he is personally working with 30 clients who may lose their home and says he's hearing hundreds, possibly thousands of other clients are also at risk.
The vast majority of my clients have ended up in emergency rooms. Again, emergency rooms, homeless shelters, or their parents' basement.
Providers say they understand fraud is an issue, but they're hoping the state can address it without hurting people in the middle who rely on services to survive.
The recent policies have created a vacuum of unknowns, instability, and crisis that did not need to happen.
Besides the people who spoke this afternoon, Senator Hoffman also shared the story of a care provider in the Duluth area who is serving about 500 clients with a staff of about 50 people. And she had to close her doors after 30 years. She even tried to get a second mortgage on her home, Hoffman says, to try to make payroll, but she wasn't able to come up with enough money to keep it going. Gordon Severson, KARE 11 News.
We're live in D.C. right now, where a tentative deal to avoid a partial government shutdown has been reached, but likely won't be voted on by tonight's deadline. That would mean a lapse in funding for some government entities at midnight. The deal between Senate Democrats and the president will fund the majority of government services through September, except for the Department of Homeland Security.
We've gotten along very well. We're working on trying to get it to stay open.
To make sure that we rein in ICE appropriately and make it more professional.
Congress must stop them.
The deal splits off immigration reforms, adding 2 weeks of negotiations. If the Senate votes the bill through today, the House would take it up on Monday. The weekend shutdown isn't expected to have major impacts, but more flight delays could be coming if it lasts any longer. And new today, President Donald Trump has announced on Truth Social that he will nominate former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair. Trump has been weighing choices for several months to take over for Fed Chair Jerome Powell. His term expires in May. I have some tragic news, too, from Hollywood today. Catherine O'Hara, who you know as Maura Rose in Schitt's Creek, and Kate McAllister in Home Alone, has passed away. O'Hara has an entertainment career spanning more than 50 years and recently made a return to the screen in the new Beetlejuice movie and the HBO drama Last of Us. O'Hara was 71. Stick with us, we got more news and weather coming up after the break.